one of the female customers that would walk in, and don't forget this was Depression years, and people had very little money, but when goods were sold at very low prices, for example, he would sell a dress for perhaps 10 shillings or 6 shillings, and the price in the stores would be at least £1 or £1 and 10 or £1 and 20 shillings. So naturally, people were very interested to be able to buy that much cheaper. The reason for that was the money was in very scarce supply. Wholesalers or manufacturers welcomed anybody who had a bit of cash, and therefore the prices he got at a very low price, because the retailers that existed had merchandise at much higher prices, and if they reduced the prices, they would lose a lot of money. So when he arrived in Narrabri, and the skies were sunny and clear, and he went to knock on the door and greet a customer, he knew that common sense told him that it wasn't just a matter of opening up the suitcase and selling the merchandise. Here's a dress, 5 shillings, you want it or you don't want it. No, he knew that you had to have a conversation of some sort. So the woman would ask him, do you think it will rain today? And Dad knew 2 words in English. One was possible and one was impossible. So wanting to please the customer, he decided that he would converse with her with these 2 words. He couldn't go far wrong. So when she said to him, do you think it'll rain today? And the skies were clear blue and sunny, he said, possible. And she thought that he understood what she was saying, so she continued to ask another question, and she said, do you think the king will live? Well, King George V was dying on his deathbed. The papers were full of that story at the time. I think it was around 1935 or 36 it must have been. And when she asked the question, do you think the king will live? Dad thought about it for a moment. He said, impossible. So naturally, the woman thought that he understood what she was saying, and she was very pleased that someone was conversing with her, and so the sale would proceed. Later on, when Dad settled in Narrabri, he called his first store David's, because he came under the name of David, because David was the brother whose passage was guaranteed by H.J. Ginges from Newcastle, who'd visited Palestine. And so he decided to call it David's, and he knew that in Sydney there was a David Jones, and perhaps by calling it David's that would bring him good luck. But then walking along the street, and at the same time he had the little shop, and Mum served behind the counter. I was in my tea chest being guarded for safety, not to run out onto the street. I can't recall where Seema was, but Seema would have perhaps been at school. And Dad was walking along the street, and at the same time Dad used to have in the backyard of this shop, had a big backyard where the condemned premises were at the end of that backyard. He had a horse and sulky where he used to still go around and sell from door to door and collect the monies that people perhaps may have owed him, and shown them some further goods. So he not only had the little shop where Mum sold from, but he's tried to sell as well from his horse and sulky. And then walking along the street, one day in Narrabri, a group of young people pointed to him and started to laugh. "Oh, there he goes." And he didn't quite understand what they were saying, but they were talking about Ginger Meggs. Ginger Meggs happened to be a very famous comic. I think it still exists even though 60 years have passed. And it was widely read by young people who it was a typical Australian type of comic that existed at the time. And they said, "Oh, there he goes, Ginger Meggs, Ginger Meggs." So Dad thought about that, and he thought, well, if they're calling me Ginger Meggs because Ginges was hard to pronounce, then perhaps he should change the name of his store to Max Ginges, and hence the name Max Ginges, or Ginges they used to call us, became his trade name, and that's how they called him. They began to call him Max. But that's how the original story of Max Ginges came about, because they thought he was Ginger Meggs, and that was... When we moved to the bigger shop from the small shop, my sister Seema used to have a great love of observing people and watching people go by. She was a shy girl, and she used to lean against the shop window entry and just watch people go by. There was a famous song around that time, 1937 or so, that had the melody of Springtime in the Rockies. And it went like this: when it's springtime in the Rockies, la 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 la, and so on. Anyway, the larrikins in the town noticed that Seema used to stand on this footpath or the entry to the shop, leaning and observing the customers or people of the town walking by, and that's how she occupied her time, in a way. Anyway, they made up a song in the town, and it went something like this: when it's sale time at Max Ginger's, and the shirts are 1 and 3, little Seema on the doorstep with her bonny eyes green. Okay. Because of our Jewish upbringing and feeling that we were different, we really weren't encouraged to invite people home or children home to our home. As a young boy, I would have perhaps played in other children's backyards and gone to other people's homes in the street. Mainly, shopkeepers who would have children who lived also at the back of the shop of their shops in the town. But in those years, electric irons were not, we wouldn't have known about electric irons. So when what we had was a fuel stove, where Dad would order wood blocks and would have an axe to chop up the blocks of wood to fuel the stove, so that we could cook on it or have our iron. They were black irons that had fabric around the handle, because the handle would become very hot, and so there would be 5 or 6 irons on the plates of the iron stove, and when ironing needed to be done, one of the irons would be taken off, and when that cooled, and the shirt or whatever garment was to be pressed would be pressed, and then that would be put back on, and another iron. So you needed about 5 or 6 irons to be able to satisfactorily iron the garments that needed to be done. And at the same time, wood would have to be fueled fed into the stove so that the heat would keep up, so that the irons would keep hot. I remember on one occasion, Seema and I, we were making toast. And how did you do toast without a toaster? When the embers of the stove, where the timber went in, would ebb low, it had a beautiful glow to it, a wonderful glow, and we put we had a three-pronged extended fork on which we put the slice of bread to feed into towards the heat of that oven where the timber was placed. And Seema on one occasion said, if I would have a dress, if I could only have a dress made of the colour of that wonderful colour right inside. You can see that, Berel, right inside there. It's like an orange. Oh, I should love a dress like that. Okay. One of the other things that I remember, that we had a drip safe. A drip safe was 4 prongs of 4 pieces of timber with hessian wrapped around it, and a sort of a little safety door, and this was kept wet so that when we put butter inside this little safe that had wet hessian to keep the butter from melting. That was one of the things that we had, and then we expanded that, and we got rid of that one, and Dad bought an ice chest which consisted of a door up the front on the top of this ice chest that would take a block of ice. To get the block of ice, I had to walk 3 blocks of the town down to Faulkner's, which was ice making and cordial factory. They used to make their own lemonade and so on for the town and district. And you could buy a block of ice for either a shilling or 2 shillings, but we used to have a hessian sack to be able to put the ice in. And as a young boy, I would bring the block of ice back. When that fully melted, then we'd go back to the ice making place at Faulkner's and get another block of ice. Ice may have lasted a couple of days. I'm not too sure, I don't remember exactly, but that's instead of having a refrigerator, which we didn't have. We never ever had a refrigerator. All we had was this ice chest. As a young boy and going to school, Dad would wake me up around 6 o'clock, perhaps a little earlier, so that I would get dressed, have a wash and get dressed, and then I would. My chores were to fill up the watering can, which we had a pump which drew water from underground and had the watering can filled, and then I would slap that watering can through the back of the shop together with a chamois to wash down the windows, which may have been in preparation for the store to open at 9. Would wind down the blinds that were where the sun was going to hit the merchandise on the windows so that they wouldn't fade, and I would pull those blinds down. They were on rollers made of canvas, and then I would wash the windows winter and summer and observe the different people that would go to work, like the barber would be coming to work, or the man opening the paper shop, or the local butchers would be going or on their way to work, and we'd greet each other with a good morning, and then I would take a broom and sweep the front of the asphalt which was outside the shop, the width of the shop, and And when I finished that, I would have either to have breakfast and then take my suitcase and violin and walk to the convent to have my violin lessons. And so that's how life was spent as a child that I recall in Narrabri.
Ja.
Abba used to speak to us always mainly in Yiddish, and I would try to answer in Yiddish as well. Seema didn't do that, and Abba would laugh at me a little, but afterwards when Sonny came to be Abba's wife, they may have spoken in Russian so that I couldn't understand what they were saying, or they may have spoken in Hebrew for the same reason. I could only catch a word or two, but when he wanted us to hear what he would say, he would converse mainly in Yiddish, because he loved to speak that language. We first came to the shop, and Abba had taken over from this family, Cowan. I think they may have been Lebanese, and having Robert Reed helped him buy the shop, he had to buy the stock that was with the shop. And I remember Seema and I were, because at the back of the store there was a box that would contain paper and rubbish so that it would be taken to the incinerator at the rear of the store, at the rear of the backyard, but in the meantime would gather until it was filled up with rubbish, mainly papers or wrapping, things like that. But it was our job to throw out a whole lot of things that were useless and no longer an item to be sold in the shop. When Dad bought the shop, there was things like separate collars in little paper packages. There were reverence collars. How in the heck people would make a living out of selling reverence collars? Those were the white collars that were looked like they were back to front collars when there weren't that many priests in the town. All right, there was Church of England, there was the Catholic Church, Presbyterian Church, the Methodist, and those reverends would have worn collars, but we could never understand. We must have thrown out dozens of these collars. And then the other thing that we noticed was trousers made of black material, black striped cotton material, which the previous retailer who was there must have had them for over 20 years, because as we were throwing them out, we noticed that as you pulled on the material, it absolutely perished. They were just of no use to anybody. As a child, we noticed that the weather around about January, February was extremely hot. Around about, must have been 40 degrees, and it was really quite stifling, the heat. Very, very little relief from the heat. But around January there seemed to be periods of regular heavy rain. The rain may have lasted, to me it seemed as if it would last a week. And there were very, very heavy rains. These rains were ideal for the farmers who would need the rain to be able to put grain in to grow for wheat and barley or whatever else they were growing in the different districts outside the town. And as children, when the rain would cease a little, we would go out onto the footpath and make little boats out of paper and watch them run down the gutter, and we'd follow those little boats. All the kids used to do that, and follow the boats going underneath little bridges and out along the footpath, and we got a great deal of joy out of that. When Abba married a second time, he had two boys. One was Sam, and Sam would be 10 years younger than me, so he would have been born around 1940, and Maya perhaps a couple of years later. Seema used to look after the children and help. In fact, she had to leave school when she was about 14 because Sonny was not well, and she really needed help in the home, and talked Dubber into having Seema leave school in order that she could have help, and with the excuse that because she was entering her teen years, she regarded the non-Jewish people as boys as a threat to her at the school, and perhaps it might have been wiser from her point of view to have Seema come and help her with the children. Sonny had spent quite a fair bit of time in hospital from time to time, and Abba would have been at a loss to know what to do with the two young boys as well as ourselves. So Seema left school when she was in about second year high school. One of the boys, Maya, was around about, he might have been about 8 or 9, I'm not too sure, maybe 10 years of age. There was a big geschrei from Sonny that when we used to have the washing in a copper. That copper would be fed with timber filled with water by hand, and she would put the dirty clothes that for them to be boiled in the copper, and that's how the washing was done. On one occasion I remember that she was emptying out the copper, and lo and behold, right at the bottom of this copper was a dead white cat. We couldn't understand why it was white, because I remember there was a black cat there, but this cat somehow I never ever saw a white cat. But anyway, the cat had to be fished out of the water, and we came to the conclusion that it was either because the water was boiling hot and Purcell was thrown into the copper to clean the clothes. It must have cleaned the cat as well. Because we were so isolated and far from other Jewish families, in fact we were the only Jewish family there, but occasionally a visitor might have be going through the town and perhaps may have inquired are there any Jewish people living in the town, and they would be informed that yes, Max Ginges, he's Jewish, and he would make himself known to us. And if the visitor, who may have come from Sydney or travelling through, he would have been, or they would have been invited to have a Shabbos dinner with us. And we didn't have much room in the kitchen, so we made room in the door next to the kitchen, which happened to be the millinery showroom, and a table would have been put into that showroom, and a meal would have been prepared for all of us. Abba would have poured kosher wine, Sonny would have lit the candles and benched over the lights, and we would participate in a Shabbos meal with a Jewish stranger. For me, it was a very big impression made upon me, because it showed us that we had that we did belong to a community, even though it was just a visitor from a town. It was like a yontiv to have someone else come and participate in Shabbos with us. Before my mum died, she said to Abba that, you know, she will have a lot of nachas, that he will have a lot of nachas out of Seema and me, you'll see, teach them music, and you will have a lot of joy from the children. And of course, unfortunately, she passed away. And I don't know if it was Mum's idea, but not long after, Abba decided that we both could do with elocution lessons, and therefore a very nice woman came to the home once a week or twice a week to teach us how to enunciate and to speak correctly, and we learnt poems like the following. Billy Boggs blew back the blackboard. Did Billy Boggs blew black the blackboard? If Billy Boggs blew black the blackboard, where is the blackboard that Billy Boggs blew blacked? Another one was, she sells seashells on the seashore. Does she sell seashells on the seashore? If she sells seashells on the seashore, where are the seashells that she sells? When I was about 14, and I suppose it's not uncommon for boys of that age to be rebellious, but Sonny and I never really got on very well together. Abba used to hit me if I was with a belt that he had around his waist. He would remove it, and I would run for my life. But if he caught up with me, I used to get a belting, because perhaps I was cheeky to Sonny, and he felt that I should have respect for her, and so on. And I remember he used to chase me around the incinerator, which was quite a large thing, and he had great difficulty catching hold of me, but when he did, I used to suffer with a belting. On one occasion, when I was about that age, I was upset for whatever reason. I think if I wouldn't have done something, Sonny decided that she wasn't going to feed me, wasn't going to give me any meals. But I overcame that problem by walking down to the Hogan's, the bakery on the corner, which was about 15 shops or 20 shops removed from where we were. I knew that Abba had an account there. So if I would order lamingtons or sausage rolls or meat pies or something else, they would charge it, and I never starved, even though Sonny wanted to punish me by not eating. On one occasion, Abba felt that I wasn't eating, so he came to the assembly with a cup of coffee and a piece of bread for me to eat. He felt a bit sorry for me, and I told him to go away. You know, he was embarrassing me. Anyway, on one occasion, there was some rows, and Sonny used to be very emotional. She always seemed to blame Seema and I for her troubles, whatever they were. I suppose on reflection it couldn't have been easy for a young woman, a woman who was 14 years Abba's junior, to come from Tel Aviv, where she had a lot of people that she knew, to come to a town, to an older man, and who had 2 children, and it couldn't have been easy for Sonny either. But of course, as children, we wouldn't have realised that, and we just sort of saw her as sort of a difficult person, and she would throw herself on the floor and yell and scream and kick her legs, and for us it was a frightening experience. We never saw that sort of behaviour before. It was something new for us, and on a couple of occasions Sonny said, well, she's leaving and she's going, and Abba sent us to follow after her, and we, even though I didn't care, she never came back, but Abba begged us to go and tell her that we'll be good children, that we won't be naughty anymore. So Seema and I raced up towards the railway station and talked her into coming back. On another occasion, I went into the kitchen one afternoon late. I knew that the train to Newcastle and Sydney would be leaving around about 3:30 in the afternoon. So around about 3 o'clock, I went into the kitchen. I said to Seema, "Well, I'll see you later. I'll see you much later." And I walked out of the backyard of the kitchen, turned the block and walked towards the railway station. I knew I had about a halfpenny or a penny in my pocket. I had no money, and got onto the train and finished up in Newcastle. I thought, well, I'll go and see Uncle Chaim in Newcastle and maybe he'll give me a job. I'll leave school. Just a boyish dreams that, but I couldn't stand the yelling and the screaming and the beltings that I was getting, and I just became rebellious. Anyway, I got to the railway station and I got out of the train. It was a steam train, and I was walking along. I didn't know how I was going to get out of there without a ticket, but because it was about 2 o'clock in the morning by the time I got to Newcastle. And I see some policemen there they must have been on the lookout for me, I didn't know, and they came up to me and they asked me what's my name and so on. I told them, I said, well, you better come with me, your father's out of his mind not knowing where you are. So we proceeded to go out of the railway station, and the first time in my life I got in the sidecar of a motorbike. I mean, in those days they had a motorbike and the policeman would drive and they would have their passenger, or in this case their prisoner, to accompany them. And we drove onto the police station, and the policeman asked me would I, first of all he wanted to ring Abba at home and tell him that I'm safe and there's no problem. In the meantime, he asked if I'd like some toast, and he proceeded to put some Vegemite on the toast, and we had a cup of coffee and toast. And I spoke to Abba and I spoke to Sonny, and she promised she'll be good to us and good to me and come back. And in the meantime, I went on to see Uncle Chaim at the shop. You know, and I spent almost the rest of the day there because I had to catch the train back, and I remember the only train back to Narrabri the following day was a goods train, and so there was some sort of seating arrangement, but I remember travelling back on the train. In those days, to go to Sydney would have taken about 15 or 16 hours, so to Newcastle, which was 100 miles from Sydney, would have taken also about 12 hours to travel that distance. But that was one of the incidents I had when I was 14 years of age. Okay. I could never ever understand why Abba didn't go to the trouble of putting pipes and water in the kitchen, but nevertheless that's how we lived. And so to have the dishes washed, they had to be done around the back. As you went out the kitchen door, you'd go past the little building that held the attachment that held the bathroom and the water. Then there was the water tank, where if you turned the water on, you'd get a lot of wrigglers in it, and we used to have to put kerosene on the top of the tank to kill the wrigglers so we could have water clear of wrigglers. It was the drinking water. And then you proceed around the back part. On the left would be the dunny, or the outside toilet, and then you take a little right-hand turn past the copper, and then there would be the laundry. Well, the laundry consisted of floorboards with 2 tubs, where the collars of the shirts would be scrubbed by hand and soap on a running board, on a washing board, which had ripples in it, metal ripples, and then you would scrub that, and of course those shirts or whatever garments needed to be washed in that manner would be put in the copper. But I remember when Seema was around about, she must have been only about 9 or 10, and she was asked to do the wash up the dishes. So Seema would take the dishes around. I must say I wasn't very helpful as a young brother. I mean, I was about 9 or 11. Seema would have been 11, I would have been 9. And wasn't a very helpful brother. And so Seema more or less slapped the stuff around to and she, in the dark, the only lighting she had was candles, which she'd lean up against the board. It's a wonder the place didn't burn down. But she had to wash the dishes by hand and bring them back into the kitchen. And later in life, when I sort of think about it, what a burden that was for a child of that age. Sonny didn't go around to wash them. I didn't. Abba didn't. It was left to Seema. And so when Seema eventually married Arnold in Melbourne, and she had her own little home and eventually came to a much larger home, I can understand her desire to have some sort of luxury that she missed out as a child. And I think she would appreciate much more than anybody else, because of the background that she had as a child. Each day that she has that sort of luxury, she never takes it for granted. She really appreciates every day that she's able to have her own bath and have her own what she would regard as luxury today, but it's sort of an everyday occurrence to most people. Next door to us was the Nixon family. I may have mentioned it before. They were a wonderful family. Years later, I said to Shirley Nixon, it consisted of 3 girls, and there was a cousin. There was, I think, 4 girls. There was Shirley, Lindsay was the oldest, and Gwen, the middle one, and Shirley was the youngest. There were three daughters. And Colin Henderson, who was the cousin, also lived there at this hotel. Anyway, they befriended us, and we became quite good friends. And on one occasion, or several occasions, they would invite us to stay at the hotel. Well, you can imagine, we would go there, and one of the things that they would do would be we would have a bath. Mind you, the baths were sort of common baths to the hotel. Not each room had a separate bath, but to walk along the corridor, you came to a beautiful bathroom. To be able to turn on a hot water tap was for us such a revelation compared to the sort of living we had. And years later, I said to Shirley, who I've met kept up the acquaintance from time to time, I said, "Tell me, Shirley, why was your mother really so good to us, both Seema and I?" She said, "Don't you know?" I said, "No." She said, "You lost your mum. We couldn't imagine a life without a mother. And here you are, 2 young children without a mother. I mean, my mum wanted to I said, "Oh, you had a wonderful mum. She was like I can't tell you how wonderful she was to us." And what they did, the Nixon family, they allocated a garage for the children to have as a playhouse and a make-believe house. And there they had cane chairs, and they would get old shoes and high-heeled shoes. You can imagine these children of 10, 11 walking around in their mother's high-heeled shoes and getting dressed up. And on one occasion, I remember sitting in the chair. We were all pretending to be grown-up people, and so one of the Nixon girls would break off a piece of cane. Now, from one of the chairs or one of the lounges in the cubby house, and that cane had a lot of little holes in it, and so they got a match and lit up the cane, which didn't burn, but smoke effused from it, and we would puff on this cane as if we were smoking a cigarette. Abba was quite innovative in the fact that he bought a Gestetner machine that one of the girls, her name was Una Fearless, and I remember seeing her name in 6th class. I think in 1931 she might have topped the year because in primary school, because her name was right on the top of the list. And I said to myself, well, I know this lady, she works in our shop. Anyway, Una was quite a innovative person, and she used to type on the Gestetner machine, on the paper that went onto the Gestetner machine, which printed sale bills. And Abba felt that he'd like to advertise a sale whenever he had one, and write down, instead of doing it in the newspaper, write it on the print it on these coloured papers. So he might have had 3 or 4 papers which were clipped together and folded, and in such a way. Anyway, I said to Abba one day, you know, this was before he got the Gestetner, or maybe at the same time he got the Gestetner machine. I said, you know, I'd like to have a bicycle. You know, down the shop there, Brazen sells bikes, and could I have one for my birthday? He said, sure. And he went and bought me a bicycle. Well, I was so thrilled with this bicycle. Little did I know that bicycle was going to be part of the business, because in the town, you can imagine, you've got 2,500 people. I don't know how many hundred homes that would consist of, but Dad not only bought the bicycle, but he bought a little basket in front of the bicycle, and that basket filled up all a lot of the bills, the sale bills, which I had to hand deliver to every home in Narrabri West, in the village. And even though the bike was for pleasure, it came in very handy, for Abba had almost a free delivery service. But I didn't mind. I was quite happy to go out and do that. It wasn't a problem. But as I said before, you know, by washing the windows and cleaning, sweeping the shop and helping in the shop in the afternoon, Dad actually paid me. And how did he pay me? If I did all those jobs 6 days a week and helped hang up the washing out on the clothesline, which wasn't a hoist, we never had a hoist, it was would be a series of wires going from one tree to another, and held up by a prop of wood which had a little fork in it. And so when the wire was down, you could hang the clothes up with pegs, and then you'd prop up with a prop the wire so that the clothes and the sheets wouldn't. And of course, then once they dried in the sun, they had to be taken off. So it was my job, and Seema's as well, to help take the clothes off the line. Someone had to do it. And of course, I wasn't really in a hurry to come home from school to do these jobs. I would have rather, and I did from time to time, play marbles on the way home from school. And of course, school would come out around 3:30, and around about 4:30 I was still playing marbles. And you'd hear Abba yelling, and Abba had a wonderfully powerful voice. His voice was so loud you could hear him from one end of town to the other. Berel! Berel! Where are you? And of course, I knew I was going to get a belting, but at least I enjoyed myself playing marbles. So if all the jobs were done, all my chores were done, chopping wood for Sonny before I went to school, washing the windows, sweeping the floor, practicing the violin, helping take the clothes off the line, helping in the shop afterwards. If I did all of those chores 6 days a week, plus helping on Sunday, bring the stock down from the upstairs stockroom area, and Abba would take it out, but I would have to go up and down the stairs with all this stock ready for trading on Monday. If I did all of that, Dad would be wonderful. He gave us 6pence to go to the movies and 3pence to buy a big whopping ice cream at half time. We thought that was wonderful. Well, in school, Seema and I used to pride ourselves when we were in primary that we never ever missed a day of school. Oh, if we had chicken pox or we had measles or something like that. But whether it rained or whatever it was, we loved to go to school, and most of the classes would be around about 30 people, 30 children in a class, a co-educational school, from the time we were in kindergarten until the time I was in high school, roughly about 30. And the interesting thing was that it was the same children almost every year, except occasionally there'd be a new one would come for a little while, maybe a few months or a year or two, because the people had been transferred to Narrabri for their jobs or whatever it was. But in the main, we knew the children from the time we were in kindergarten right through to high school. Now, when we were in third year high school, there would have been perhaps also about 25 children. By the time I got to fourth year high school, and don't forget that fifth year was 5 years was the leaving certificate, third year was intermediate certificate, would have been roughly 28 to 30 children. Then in fourth year there would have been about 15 of us, because most of the children would have had to have left school to get a job or to become apprentices in a garage or with a builder, or to help on the farm with their parents. Very few that I can recall ever went to university in Sydney or Armidale, or Newcastle, but I can't recall anybody that I know of that went on to university from Narrabri. But in fourth year high school, say 15, and fifth year, the year I did my leaving certificate, that was called in those days, not high school certificate, there were three children, 2 boys and a girl. And so it was little wonder that I became dux of the school when school finished. It wasn't difficult to become dux when there's only 3 of us in the whole of that year, and I was captain of the school and had those sort of privileges. But it seemed odd when I look back on it that only 3 of us finished the leaving certificate.